With an ominous warning of a temporal front opening up in the 26th century, Starfleet Command and the United Federation of Planets would pour its resources into developing Starship classes with the ability to travel through time, and the first class to be constructed, the Paladin Class, would become as controversial as she was advanced, albeit centuries later. But what do we know about this temporal class? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using Beta Canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Paladin Class as first seen in Star Trek Online to better understand its place in Star Trek history. Please note, this Starship Design is Beta Canon, and I wanted to let my imagination wander a little bit to connect various points throughout Star Trek's temporal Cold War into one storyline. Of course, once I started to do that, my mind went all over the place, and there are many stories to tell about the temporal Cold War. So in the future, I intend to visit the storyline again through the various ships of the 26th century, further explaining certain events that would directly impact this confusing period in Starfleet history. Also, I'd like to thank my good friend Vortex for providing me this awesome 3D model of the Paladin Class. Please take a moment to check out and subscribe to his YouTube channel in the description below. But as always, because this is just a Beta Canon video, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. In short, the temporal Cold War was threatening to unravel the entire timeline from the 31st century back. When Captain Jonathan Archer of the NX Enterprise first traveled through time, it's doubtful that anyone could have guessed the profound effect and utter danger that time travel truly posed. Starfleet history is littered with temporal violations. Whether it was Dr. Leonard McCoy stepping through the Guardian of Forever, rewriting the 1930s completely by accident, or Benjamin Sisko and the crew of the Defiant visiting James T. Kirk's Constitution-class Enterprise, and then return to the 24th century with tribbles in tow, the Federation Council still seemed blinded to the danger. Certainly by the 23rd century, laws and regulations regarding time travel had been well established, with the Department of Temporal Investigations being created to look into all matters of temporal incursions. But as with all things, as time went on, regulations and views on time travel in the Federation had laxed, eventually leading to Starfleet actively developing the temporal drive after the discovery that the temporal Cold War was indeed still happening. In 2151, early in the NX-01 Enterprise's mission, Captain Archer and his crew would become directly involved with what would become known as the temporal Cold War. And although this first intrepid crew of Starfleet explorers would be involved in several incidents of that Cold War, by 2154, it would generally be accepted that the entire Cold War nonsense was over, with Starfleet Command closing the file and burying the entire matter. This, of course, was not true, not exactly anyhow, as time itself is not so linear or so neat and tidy. Receiving a cryptic warning in 2520 by a time travel agent named Daniels, Starfleet Command would set its best and brightest engineers and scientists the task of building Starship classes able to travel through time easily, in an effort to keep the timeline stable. And after almost 30 years of experimentation and development, finally in 2550, several new temporal Starship classes would be launched, including the Paladin Class. Sitting at a length of 510.7 meters and containing the newly established NCV registry, the Paladin Class would be designed to be operated by 420 officers and crew members. With both warp and transwarp drive systems, the Paladin Class would have a standard safe cruising speed of warp factor 9.6. with a maximum speed of warp factor 9.999 for 72-hour increments. Tactically, the Paladin class, as with all temporal starship classes, would be armed to the teeth. Containing temporally phased phaser emitter arrays, as well as torpedo launching systems capable of firing photon, quantum, transphasic, and the newly developed tachyon torpedoes. In a constant state of temporal flux, these newly developed torpedoes could slip in and out of the time stream, bypassing an enemy's shields entirely, at least in theory. Of course, this new weapon system, though devastating to enemy vessels without time travel capability, would have very little effect on vessels involved in the Temporal Cold War, as most of those vessels included temporal shielding, protecting a starship from the temporal stress of time travel, as well as these types of weapons. The temporal drive was quite an ingenious piece of Starfleet technology. Utilizing the already well-established transwarp drive system employed during the 26th century, special subspace emitters would alter the transwarp tunnel itself, allowing the vessel to manipulate the curvatures of space-time, and thus starships could travel through time. However, the temporal drive did have its limitations, as traveling through time would quickly deplete the emitter arrays as the starship traveled, making jumps further than 300 years at a time impossible, without the starship dropping back into normal space and recharging the emitters. And although Starfleet's best and brightest had attempted to solve the problem by continuously recharging the emitters while in flight, the sheer energy requirements to keep the time tunnel stable, the ship's environment systems running, as well as the integrity of the starship itself, proved at the time to be all that the starship could handle. Eventually, this problem would be solved, but not in the 26th century. A low-level temporal field would also be continuously running while the starship was in normal operations. This would prevent changes to the timeline from affecting any of the temporal starship classes. The Paladin class would be launched in 2550, completely classified as to her temporal abilities, and charged with the assignment of monitoring the timeline for any deviations, and if one was detected, then to investigate and restore the current timeline. And overall, the class would be successful in its mission, even participating in the Battle of Procyon 5, alongside the Federation's current flagship, the Enterprise J. The Paladin class would continue its secret service to the Federation into the 27th century, receiving periodic upgrades and refits as required, until finally being decommissioned in 2643 in favor of newly constructed temporal starship classes. But the controversy over the Paladin and her sister starship classes would have long-lasting effects, when centuries later, her mission records, along with her true abilities, would be leaked throughout the Milky Way galaxy, actually creating the Temporal Cold War itself. Created as a way for Starfleet Command and the Federation to keep an eye on the timeline and its integrity, the Paladin class would instead become Starfleet's dirty little secret centuries later, earning this class its controversial place in galactic history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of the Paladin class and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel maintain the integrity of the timeline? Then consider becoming a channel patron, a major help that allows this channel to purchase resources and 3D models to keep it going. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.